11:46 p.m. November 3rd, 2025, Youngstown, Ohio. On the eastern edge of Erskine Avenue, past the shuttered auto body yards and the empty lot where the Mahoning Valley rail spur used to run, a decommissioned brass foundry sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The sign out front read, "Closure Notice, filed August 2024. The padlock on the gate was theatrical. Inside, two Haas VF2 CNC machining centers ran at full spindle speed, and the furnaces had been burning 3 nights a week for the better part of 31 months. 14 minutes. That's how long Joint Task Force CINDERHOUSE needed to move from the first vehicle breach to a fully secured production floor. 14 minutes to reach 22 people in zip cuffs, 2 live CNC lines, and a component inventory that would take federal evidence teams the better part of 4 days to fully catalog. By the time the sun came up over Erskine Avenue, agents had counted 1,900 suppressor cores and 460 lower receivers, $58 million in untaxed sales across 31 months and 31 states, and a utility anomaly so precise it had a name before it had a case file. This is the story of Joint Task Force CINDERHOUSE, the largest illegal suppressor prosecution brought under the National Firearms Act in the Northern District of Ohio in a decade. It didn't start with a confidential informant, a wiretap, or a traffic stop. It started with a spreadsheet and a man named Marcus Bell who noticed that a closed building was eating electricity like a small factory. This is how it happened. To understand what CINDERHOUSE uncovered, you need to understand how completely everything inside that building was hidden. On paper, the Erskine Avenue Foundry had been mothballed since August 2024. The Ohio Secretary of State's office showed the operating entity, a shell registered as Mahoning Precision Casting LLC, as administratively dissolved. The EPA site closure filing was current. Property tax payments were on time, paid remotely through a Columbus-based escrow service. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. The loading dock on the north side faced a dead-end service road. Trucks came and went between midnight and 4 a.m., 2 or 3 nights a week, and the area generated no complaint calls. Every document was clean. NFA compliance filings absent, as expected for a dissolved entity. Ohio business registration dissolved. Finished goods inventory on record with the Ohio Department of Taxation 0. All signatures on the closure filings matched. All of it pointed to an empty building, except for the electricity. Marcus Bell was 34 years old and had spent 6 years as a consumption analyst at First Energy's Regional Grid Operations Center outside Akron. His job was to flag anomalous load patterns, industrial parcels drawing power inconsistent with their declared operational status. The work was granular and almost entirely invisible. Most anomalies resolved as clerical errors, a meter reading attributed to the wrong address, a seasonal HVAC system left running on a closed site, a data center backup draw that hit once a quarter. The flags were routine. The resolutions were routine. Bell filed between 40 and 60 anomaly reports in a calendar year. Most went nowhere. On September 8, 2025, Bell was running a monthly variant sweep across Mahoning County's commercial and industrial metered accounts. The software flagged the Erskine Avenue property for the 3rd consecutive month. The parcel's declared status was non-operational. Its average monthly draw over the prior 12 months was 38,000 kilowatt-hours. Bell pulled the historical baseline. Pre-closure, when the foundry ran a full 3-shift rotation, peak monthly draw had been between 62 and 68,000 kilowatt-hours. The current draw, on a supposedly closed building, was running at roughly 58% of active operation levels, and the trend line was climbing. Month over month for 6 consecutive months, the draw had gone up an average of 4 to 5%. Whatever was inside Erskine Avenue was not winding down, it was scaling up. Bell did not call the police. He was a utility analyst, not a law enforcement officer. What he did was file a formal operational status discrepancy report through First Energy's regulatory compliance interface, a form that, under Ohio Public Utilities Commission rules, forwarded automatically to the state fire marshal's office and, when the discrepancy exceeded a defined threshold, to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. The BCI received Bell's report on September 9, 2025. A BCI duty analyst named Carrington matched the Erskine Avenue address against the Ohio Secretary of State database, confirmed the dissolved status, and escalated to BCY's Special Investigations Unit. The Special Investigations Unit made one phone call to the ATF Columbus Field Division, 38,000 kilowatt-hours. That's the number that started everything. A closed building drawing enough power to run a fabrication shop, climbing 5% a month for half a year. Bell noticed, and that noticing unspooled what came next. The reverse arithmetic came quickly. A TF Special Agent in Charge, Diana Howell, 47, 21 years at the Columbus Field Division, including 8 years running NFA compliance enforcement, pulled the Foundry's original operating specs from its EPA closure documentation. The building had housed, at peak, 6 industrial brass pour furnaces, 12 CNC-capable machining stations, and a climate-controlled assembly floor of approximately 14,000 square feet. A 38,000 kilowatt-hour monthly draw on a facility that size pointed to 2 to 3 active furnaces and a partial machining line. The EPA filing declared all equipment mothballed or removed. If the equipment was gone, the draw made no sense. If the draw was real, and utility meters don't fabricate consumption, then equipment was running. Equipment that wasn't supposed to exist in a building that wasn't supposed to be operating, producing something that wasn't declared anywhere. What Howell needed to know. What was it producing? That question went to Joint Task Force CINDERHOUSE, a TF lead, FBI Cleveland Field Office in support, IRS Criminal Investigation Division handling financial forensics, and the Ohio State Highway Patrol on perimeter and intercept. The task force designation was assigned September 12, 2025. Lead Case Agent, ATF Special Agent, Preston Darby, 39, 14 years at the Columbus Field Division, NFA Specialist with 4 prior suppressor prosecutions on his record. The first complication arrived inside the first week. Passive surveillance on Erskine Avenue, unmarked vehicles on the service road, remote optical coverage from a utility pole 2 blocks east, confirmed truck activity on the property, but the loading dock faced north, away from every viable observation angle, and the windows on the production floor had been painted black from the inside. Thermal imaging from a state police aviation unit flying at 1,500 feet confirmed heat signatures consistent with active furnace operation, but couldn't resolve internal layout or product type. Darby's team had a problem. They knew something was happening inside that building. They couldn't yet say what, and without a clearer articulation of probable cause, a Title III application for a wiretap would not survive judicial review. They needed more specificity. Howell called FBI Cleveland's Technical Operations Group. The solution was a thermal overflight series, 3 flights, staggered across 3 separate operational nights in late September, using a Cessna Citation 2 equipped with a FLIR Systems STAR SAFIRE 3 sensor package. The flights mapped the internal thermal profile of the production floor at high resolution. 2 distinct heat plumes consistent with CNC spindle motor operation. 3 separate furnace signatures in the northwestern quadrant, and a colder zone in the southeast corner consistent with climate-controlled storage. 1 set of thermal returns matched the footprint of HOSFI F2 machining centers exactly. A profile the Technical Operations Group's database had cataloged from 7 prior NFA enforcement actions. HOS VF2s, 4-axis vertical machining centers, used legitimately in aerospace and precision casting. Also, the machine of choice for illegal suppressor core fabrication at scale, because their repeatability tolerances, down to plus or minus 5/10,000ths of an inch, could produce consistent internal baffling geometry without a skilled machinist at the controls between cycles. By October 1st, CINDERHOUSE had enough for the Title III application. U.S. Magistrate Judge Elaine Forsyth, Northern District of Ohio, signed the sealed wiretap authorization on October 3, 2025. The 9-week intelligence collection phase had begun. I spent time going through the wiretap logs from this case file, and one detail kept standing out. The people running this operation almost never discussed the product directly. They used vocabulary built around castings, precision runs, and inventory allocation, language borrowed wholesale from the legitimate foundry business the building used to house. pull any single intercept out of context, and it reads like a routine manufacturing conversation. The sophistication of that cover language told Darby's team something important about who they were dealing with. The subject at the center of the Cinderhouse case file is identified in court documents as a composite designation. We'll call him Raymond Voss, 44 years old. A machining engineer by training with an undergraduate degree from Youngstown State University and a graduate certificate in precision manufacturing from a technical institute in western Pennsylvania. Voss had spent 12 years working legitimate CNC shops in the Mahoning Valley before the regional steel contraction hollowed out the industrial base and left him, as he later described it in a jailhouse interview, with skills and no floor to put them on. What's most surprising about this case isn't the scale of the suppressor operation. It's how cleanly Voss had kept his public life separate from what was happening on Erskine Avenue. He lived in a rented house in Boardman Township, drove a 4-year-old Ford F-15. Coached youth hockey on weekends and had no prior federal record. Neighbors interviewed after the arrest described him uniformly as quiet, technically minded, always polite, paid his dues to the neighborhood association on time. Nothing about Raymond Voss pointed to what he was running 3 nights a week on Erskine Avenue. Underneath the Boardman Township quiet, Voss had spent 31 months building what Cinderhouse prosecutors would later call the most operationally complete illegal suppressor pipeline discovered in the Eastern District since the passage of the Hughes Amendment. He hadn't stumbled into this, he had engineered it. It started with the Foundry itself. Voss had taken a 10-year lease on the Erskine Avenue property in early 2023 under the name of a holding company, registered in Wyoming, with a registered agent in Cheyenne, and no traceable connection to his personal identity. That holding company had then filed the closure notice in August 2024, not because the operation was ending, but because Voss had decided that a closed property drew less routine regulatory attention than an active one. He paid the property taxes on time, kept the exterior maintenance current, and let the weeds grow just enough at the front gate to suggest genuine abandonment. Inside, Voss had installed the 2 Haas VF2 machines, purchased through a series of equipment brokers across 3 states, with payment routed through a separate Wyoming LLC. The suppressor cores being produced on those machines were baffle-stack designs, internal geometry optimized for calibers ranging from 9mm through .45 ACP and .300 blackout. Each core came off the CNC line without a serial number, without a Form 4 filing, without any of the federal transfer documentation required under 26 U.S.C. 5861. They were, by every legal definition, unregistered NFA items produced in bulk for illegal distribution. The distribution network Voss built ran through 3 primary channels. The first was a series of private sales brokered through encrypted messaging applications, Signal and Telegram channels operating under firearms adjacent cover names that functioned as storefronts. The second was a network of traveling intermediaries, 12 individuals across 8 states who moved product in personal vehicles, paid in cash or in Monero cryptocurrency, and had no documented connection to one another or to Voss beyond the encrypted channels. The third channel was the most concerning to federal prosecutors. A recurring bulk buyer in the Southwest, never identified by name in any intercepted communication, who received shipments averaging 40 to 60 components per delivery at intervals of approximately 3 weeks for at least 18 months of the 31-month run. The financial architecture was proportionally layered. IRS Criminal Investigations Special Agent Lorraine Chu, 36, 9 years at CI, with a background in cryptocurrency forensics, built the money trail over 7 weeks of analysis. Payments flowed into Voss's accounts through a cascade. Monero conversions to Bitcoin, Bitcoin to a custodial exchange account held under a name variant of the Wyoming LLC, exchange to wire, wire to a small regional credit union in eastern Ohio under a business account for a precision casting consultation service that declared annual revenues of between $40,000 and $80,000. In reality, CY's analysis put total untaxed revenues from the Erskine Avenue operation at $58 million across 31 months, an average of just under $1,900 per unit across the full component count, wholesale. $58 million. moving through a credit union account that declared $80,000 a year. Here's a take that'll probably draw some disagreement. The regulatory gaps that let this operation run for 31 months are not primarily a law enforcement failure. They're a structural gap in how federal agencies share data across jurisdictions. The utility anomaly Marcus Bell filed should have cross-referenced against NFA dealer registrations, closed business filings, and regional power consumption baselines inside a single automated system. It doesn't. It took a human analyst filing a paper-equivalent form to a state agency that then made a phone call. 31 months, 1,900 suppressor cores. That's the cost of siloed data architecture. By late October 2025, CINDERHOUSE had enough to move. The Wiretap had produced 97 hours of intercepts. CI had the financial architecture mapped. The thermal overflight series had confirmed the internal layout of the production floor with enough specificity to brief a tactical entry team. What Darby's team didn't have yet was confirmation of how many people would be inside the building on any given operational night. That was the second major obstacle. The intercepts established that the Foundry ran on a rotating crew of between 8 and 14 individuals on any active production night. Machinists, furnace operators, a logistics coordinator, and at least 2 armed security personnel whose presence had been captured in audio references to the watch, rotating at 2-hour intervals. A dynamic entry with an unknown number of armed individuals in a 14,000 square foot space, in the dark, with active heavy machinery running, was a problem that required a precise solution. A TF's Special Response Team out of the Cincinnati field office was brought in for the planning phase. Lead SRT Coordinator, ATF, Supervisory Special Agent Kirk Navarro, 42, 16 years with the SRT. Navarro's team spent 5 days on site preparation, walking the exterior perimeter under cover of maintenance utility vehicles, mapping every entry point, every egress, every interior obstacle the thermal overflights had identified. The decision was made to breach simultaneously on 3 axes: the primary roll-up door on the north loading dock, the emergency exit on the south wall, and the roof access hatch above the CNC machining floor. The roof entry was critical. It put a 4-agent element directly above the production floor before any ground-level contact was made. The question Navarro couldn't fully answer going into the breach was where those armed security personnel would be. The intercepts suggested handguns. No confirmation of long guns. No confirmation of body armor. The SRT would be going in with that uncertainty unresolved, and Navarro's after-action report later noted that this was the primary risk variable on the night of the operation. 48 hours before the breach, CINDERHOUSE's surveillance element picked up an unscheduled daytime visit to the property. A single vehicle, a gray Chevrolet Express van, arriving mid-afternoon and departing 90 minutes later. The intercepts from that afternoon captured a conversation consistent with a delivery of raw aluminum and stainless steel bar stock. The operation was not winding down. It was restocking for another production run. Darby moved the breach timeline up by 24 hours. Monday night into Tuesday morning, November 3rd into November 4th, 2025. The CINDERHOUSE breach element assembled at a staging area in a warehouse parking lot on South Avenue, 6 blocks from Erskine Avenue. The element comprised 31 agents and officers, 14 ATF SRT operators, 8 FBI Cleveland tactical agents, 6 Ohio State Highway Patrol troopers on exterior perimeter, and 3 IRSCI agents embedded for evidence processing. 2 OSHP aviation units were holding at Youngstown Warren Regional Airport, 8 minutes out. A Lenco Bearcat from the ATF Cincinnati Division was staged on the service road behind the property. At 11:31 p.m., a wiretap intercept confirmed active machinery on the production floor. The furnaces were running, the CNC lines were running, the crew was inside. At 11:39 p.m., Navarro transmitted the single-word authorization to the breach element. CINDERHOUSE, execute. Alpha Team, 6 ATF SRT operators, approached the north loading dock in a white commercial panel van, plates registered to a fictitious HVAC contractor. They had the door on their timeline by 11:41 p.m. Bravo Team, 4 FBI tactical agents, reached the south emergency exit at the same moment. Hydraulic door spreader, 7 seconds. Charlie Team, 4. ATF SRT operators, was already on the roof. They had fast roped from the OSHP aviation unit's hover at 60 feet, under 8 seconds from skid to surface, at 11:40 p.m., 60 seconds ahead of the ground breach to position above the interior floor hatch. At 11:41 p.m. and 40 seconds, all three breach elements made simultaneous entry. The interior was loud: furnace roar, CNC spindle noise, exhaust ventilation. The lighting was industrial fluorescent, full brightness on the machining floor. Alpha Team moved left, toward the northwest furnace quadrant. Bravo Team covered the southeast storage zone. Charlie Team dropped through the roof hatch onto a catwalk above the CNC line and established elevated coverage of the full production floor. The two armed security personnel were at the north end of the machining floor. One reached for a holstered firearm. A TFSRT operators covered him before the draw was complete. A TF, federal agents, hands where I can see them, down on the floor, now. Both security personnel complied. Neither fired. What followed was 14 minutes of methodical movement through the building. Production workers, logistics personnel, and the Foundry's night shift coordinator brought to the floor one by one, zip-cuffed, identified, and moved to the exterior processing area where OSHP troopers maintained custody. Raymond Voss was located in a converted office at the rear of the building, behind a locked steel door, with a laptop open on a production scheduling spreadsheet and a Glock 17 in a desk drawer, loaded, safety off. Mr. Voss, a TF, you're under federal arrest. Step away from the desk. Voss said nothing. He stood up slowly, moved away from the desk, and placed his hands behind his back. The Glock stayed in the drawer. The laptop stayed open. IRSCI agents would image it on-site within the hour. At 11:55 p.m., 14 minutes and 20 seconds after first entry, Navarro transmitted to the staging element. Floor is secure, 22 in custody, no injuries to law enforcement. Begin evidence processing. What the evidence teams found over the next 4 days redefined the scope of what CINDERHOUSE had been chasing. The two Haas VF2 machining centers were running active production programs at the moment of entry. The CNC controllers held toolpath files for 4 distinct suppressor core configurations, 2 9mm designs, 1.45 ACP design, and 1.300 blackout design. The programs were optimized for minimum cycle time. Each 9mm core was cutting in approximately 11 minutes per unit, each .300 blackout in approximately 18. At the observed operational cadence of 3 production nights per week, 5 to 6 hours per night per machine, the math produced a sustained output capacity of roughly 40 to 60 cores per week, consistent with the 31-month total. The southeast storage zone held the finished inventory, not yet shipped. 1,900 suppressor cores, individually wrapped in foam-padded trays, stacked on shelving that ran floor to ceiling for 60 feet. 460 lower receivers, also without serial numbers, were found in a separate locked cage. Component total, 2,360 individual NFA-regulated items in a single building, none of them registered, none of them taxed, none of them documented in any federal database. One detail from the evidence inventory that stayed with me reading through the case documentation: every single suppressor core was individually test-fit checked. There were gauges at the end of the line, go/no-go tooling, quality control records on clipboards. These weren't rough castings. They were finished, toleranced, inspected components. Whoever was buying them was getting professional-grade product. The financial forensics seized on-site confirmed and extended what CI had already mapped. 3 additional bank accounts, not previously identified, were found in records on Voss's laptop. Lorraine Chu's team spent 6 weeks post-seizure tracing the full transaction picture. Final tally: $58 million in proceeds across 31 months through 9 financial accounts, 4 LLCs, and 2 cryptocurrency exchange platforms. Put yourself in Marcus Bell's shoes for a second, sitting at a grid operations console in Akron, running a routine variance report, flagging a building the state says is closed. He had no idea what he was looking at. He filed a form. That form, through a chain of referrals and phone calls and one ATF special agent who pulled a thermal imaging request, became the pin that pulled out of a $58 million suppressor pipeline. Bell later gave a brief statement through First Energy's communications office. He said he was glad the report was useful. He went back to work the next Monday. The press conference was held at ATF's Columbus Field Division on the morning of November 5th. A TF Special Agent in Charge, Diana Howell, stood at the podium beside FBI Cleveland Field Office Assistant Special Agent in Charge Thomas Renfield and IRS Criminal Investigations Special Agent in Charge for the Northern District Alicia Park. The evidence table behind them held a representative sample of the seized components: 2 rows of suppressor cores, a small grouping of lower receivers, and printouts of the financial transaction mapping. Howell read the numbers in sequence: 31 months, $58 million, 1,900 suppressor cores, 460 lower receivers, 22 arrests across 4 jurisdictions: Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky, representing CINDERHOUSE's reach into Voss's distribution network through parallel arrest warrants executed the same morning. The press conference lasted 37 minutes. What Howell did not say publicly, what remained under seal, was that Voss's laptop had contained something beyond production records and financial accounts. It contained an encrypted client directory, and inside that directory were references to buyers in 14 states, 2 of whom were cross-referenced against active federal investigations in other districts. Those names were not announced on November 5th. They remained sealed. They are the reason CINDERHOUSE is not fully closed. The CINDERHOUSE prosecution moved to the Northern District of Ohio Federal Courthouse in Cleveland. Voss was charged on a 26-count indictment unsealed November 6, 2025. Multiple counts under 26 U.S.C. 5861 for manufacture, transfer, and possession of unregistered NFA firearms, 18 counts under 26 U.S.C. 5871 as the penalty statute, 7 counts of federal tax evasion under 26 U.S.C. 7201, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit money laundering under 18 U.S.C. 1956. 17 additional defendants from the distribution network faced individual indictments ranging from 2 to 9 counts each. The defense team, led by a Columbus-based federal criminal defense attorney, filed a motion to suppress the Title III wiretap evidence on Fourth Amendment grounds, arguing that the initial referral chain, from Bell's utility anomaly report through the BCI to ATF, did not constitute legally sufficient predicate for the surveillance authorization. U.S. District Judge Harold Minish, Northern District of Ohio, denied the suppression motion in a 23-page ruling in January 2026, finding that the BCI escalation was consistent with established referral protocols and that the wiretap application had independent probable cause basis in the thermal overflight data. Trial began in March 2026. The defense's primary narrative was that Voss believed he was operating in a legal gray area, that the components, as machined pieces without assembled silencer housings, did not constitute suppressors under NFA definitions until assembled. The prosecution's response was methodical. A TF forensic firearms examiner, Special Agent Cynthia Olawale, testified over 2 days that each core, as produced, met the statutory definition of a silencer under 18 U.S.C. 921A-24. The baffled geometry was complete, functional, and purposive. There was no gray area. Every item in that building was a finished NFA-regulated item at the moment it came off the CNC line. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all 26 counts on March 28, 2026, after 4 days of deliberation. On May 14, 2026, Judge Minich handed down sentencing. Raymond Voss received 22 years in federal custody with no eligibility for early release under the applicable sentencing guidelines for aggregate NFA violations, combined with the tax evasion and money laundering counts. Forfeiture order: $58 million, both the physical assets of the Erskine Avenue property and all identified financial accounts. The 2 Haas VF2 machines were seized under civil forfeiture and transferred to ATF's evidence facility in Columbus. The distribution network defendants received sentences ranging from 3 to 11 years, depending on individual charge counts and cooperation agreements. The forfeited assets are in federal receivership. The Erskine Avenue property will be auctioned as a commercial real estate parcel. Proceeds go to the Asset Forfeiture Fund under ATF jurisdiction, with a designated allocation toward NFA enforcement operations in the Northern District. The encrypted client directory on Voss's laptop remains the open thread. IRS Criminal Investigation and FBI Cleveland Cyber Division have spent 6 months working the decryption on the directory's protected partition. As of the close of the Cinderhouse trial, they had partially decrypted entries corresponding to approximately 41 distinct buyer identifiers, usernames, cryptocurrency wallet addresses, and in 8 cases, partial geographic coordinates for drop locations. Of those 41 identifiers, 14 have been cross-referenced against existing federal investigations in other districts. 4 have generated Interpol coordination requests. Those names are inside federal case files tonight. They are not yet in handcuffs. What do you think? Did the 31-month run of this operation represent a regulatory failure, or is it simply the practical limit of what any enforcement system can detect in a country with this many industrial parcels and this much legitimate manufacturing activity? That question doesn't have a clean answer. Comment below with what you think should change. Here's what this case tells us about the current enforcement environment. The NFA registration system was built on the assumption that the barrier to suppressor fabrication was industrial access. CNC machines at the scale Voss was running were, in 1986, not something a private individual could casually acquire. That assumption no longer holds. The machines are available, the toolpath programming is learnable, and the only thing standing between a closed building and a production run is whether someone at a grid operations console runs a variance report and notices that the numbers don't add up. One utility analyst filing one anomaly report unspooled a $58 million NFA pipeline. Every closed industrial parcel in this country has a power meter. Right now, somewhere, a meter is running on a building that shouldn't need one. The question is whether anyone is checking the spreadsheet. If you want to keep walking through federal case files the way the agents themselves walk through them, from the first anomaly flag to the dawn breach to the courtroom, subscribe to FBI documents and tell us in the comments which unsolved federal case you want us to open next. Case closed.